So this might be a rather bold statement, but I think I've drawn in the most MIDI notes than anybody else ever. Hello everybody, my name is InspirAspir, and today I am presenting you with a different video than I'm used to. This style is a bit different. As some of you may know, I like to make Launchpad light shows in my free time, and in order to make these light shows, I draw in MIDI notes in a MIDI clip using Ableton. As the year came to a conclusion, I made a best of video compiling the best Launchpad light shows I've made in the past year. And as I was compiling these videos, that got me wondering. As of recording this video, I have finished 37 light shows. And I know that in each of these light shows, I use a lot of MIDI notes. So, I was curious, how many MIDI notes have I ever drawn in, ever? Well, the answer surprised me. If you're unfamiliar with what I'm talking about, I use a program called Ableton that's typically used to make music. In order to make music in Ableton, you can create virtual instruments that play notes based on MIDI clips that you create. In each of these MIDI clips, you can assign notes to this piano roll. These MIDI clips send data as output to the instrument. Typically, this data is then used to create the sounds that you hear when making music. However, I use these MIDI clips to send output to my Launchpad in form of lights. And by changing the velocity of each of these notes, which is typically used for volume, I can change the color. Essentially, this gives me the ability to draw in MIDI notes in Ableton, and I can see the output visually as my lights on my Launchpad. Creating complicated patterns of these MIDI notes allows me to make light shows synced to any song that I want, which may look like this. For those of you wondering, it typically takes weeks, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, to make a single light show. And in real time, I would estimate it takes about 8 or 9 hours of placing these notes. And since I've been making these light shows for almost 2 years now, I was curious how many individual MIDI notes I've ever placed. So to count that number, I created a Max for Live device. This device scrubs through each MIDI clip and counts every individual note contained within that clip. Now, I had never coded or programmed with Max for Live before, so this was new for me, so it took me a little time to make this device, but eventually I ended up with something I was satisfied with. After thorough testing, I was convinced it worked, and that this device could properly and accurately count every MIDI note contained within a MIDI clip. And then that began the long process of counting every note within every light show I've ever made. Luckily, this device was dependent on scrubbing through the entire clip, and it was not dependent on going at any sort of speed. So to make my life a little easier, I bumped my BPM up to 999 for every light show. Weird, I know, but hear me out. This allowed me to scrub through the entire MIDI clip within a couple of seconds. After I made it through any given MIDI clip, I jotted down the number in an Excel sheet, and then I just repeated this pattern for every light show. Yes, all 37. It took a lot of time. Anyways, what I found was actually sort of surprising. So here I am in the final Excel sheet containing the amount of MIDI notes in every Launchpad light show I have ever made, starting with the top being the oldest light show and the bottom being the most recent I've ever put out. Now keep in mind, this is only containing light shows I've finished. There have been quite a few that I've started and haven't gotten much progress on and abandoned. So there have been a few notes that I've drawn in other project files that I'm not taking into account. But also, to be fair, I most likely haven't drawn in each of these notes individually. Some of them may have been copied and pasted. I will admit, I do that sometimes just for the sake of my sanity when making these. So those 2 points may balance each other out. This leftmost column is the name of the light show, and this right column is the number of individual MIDI notes drawn in to make that light show. You may see 2 light shows here. These 2 light shows have a 0 written next to them because I lost their project file and I couldn't accurately collect that data. So for now, I will delete them. And you can see this graph over here on the right is the result of these light shows plotted, where this x-axis is the name of the light show and the y-axis is the number of individual MIDI notes drawn in for that light show. You can see that over time there's a small increase generally, if I were to probably draw a linear line, because I think recently I've tended to make more complex light shows using more MIDI notes. Finally, this data up here in green is what you've been waiting for. This is the final count I have made 1,514,697 MIDI notes. Wow. That's a lot. Spread out over 34 light shows, making an average of 44,549, rounded up 550, MIDI notes per light show. The music producers out there who are unfamiliar with my content may be wondering why there are so many MIDI notes used in every light show. Like I tried to explain earlier, this is what it takes to make a light show. Yeah. Granted, a lot of MIDI notes are stacked on top of each other, repetitively, like this, to give the effect of maybe a fading or a rainbow pattern. So what this is showing is the same button may be lighting up multiple times in a row, but it's simply changing colors, or as I explained earlier, velocities. Therefore, the same note may be drawn in hundreds, if not thousands of times in a single light show. But in order for it to have a different color every time, technically you do have to draw in a separate MIDI note. So there you have it, everyone. I've drawn in over 1.5 million MIDI notes in my lifetime, and that's just as I'm recording this video now. I think it's safe to say that's one of the highest recorded numbers I've ever seen, at least. If any of you know for a fact and can prove that you've drawn in more, go for it, although I don't know why you'd want to waste the time like I did to prove that. But anyways, for real, if you really want to prove me wrong, and you know for a fact that you've drawn in more MIDI notes, then be my guest and prove me wrong. And I do realize a lot of you may be sitting here saying, excuse me, InspirAspir, why do I care? Then I probably wouldn't have a good answer for you. Sorry. I just thought this would be a fun little thing. I was genuinely curious myself, and so I purely made this for my sake. And so I figured I may as well make a video out of it and share it with you in case anyone happens to be curious. So there you have it. I think that'll wrap up the video. That's all I wanted to share with you. I thought it'd be an interesting change of pace compared to the normal videos I put out. If any of you are actually genuinely curious about this kind of thing, this statistical data stuff, let me know. Maybe I'll make some other video like it in the future. If not, then I won't. As always, thanks for watching. Hope you found it interesting, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye.